wasn't the rope that broke Elias Boone's heart. It was the way the girls didn't cry. He found them by accident just past dawn while hauling grain through a snow-choked trail that passed the old depot. The train station had been shut for years. No one came that way anymore. But someone had left something behind. Two girls, barefoot, tied to a rusted bench post with packing cord like they were luggage no one came back for. The older one, maybe 8, sat straight as she could, chin up, face bruised. The younger, she had her arms curled around her belly, shaking. They didn't scream when they saw Elias, didn't beg. They only looked at him, eyes that had seen too much, and behind them in the shadows of the platform shed, a woman, still breathing barely, a widow's ring on her hand, blood on her dress, eyes closed like she'd stopped asking for help a long time ago. Elias didn't say a word. He just untied the girls, lifted the woman into his cart, and walked the horse home through the snow slower than he ever had. Some men would have turned away, said, "Not my business." But Elias Boone had once buried a child. He knew what silence meant. And this silence had names. What happened to the widow who hurt them, and why did she know Elias's name even before she woke? The answers lie ahead. But first, someone had to choose to stay. Would you have stopped too? Want to know what Elias does next? Let's find out together. The wind had worn the paint off the old depot years ago. Now it just muttered through the slats like an old man too tired to finish a sentence. Most trains didn't stop there anymore, hadn't for a decade or more. The town had thinned out too, like soup stretched too far with water. But that morning when Elias Boone drove past the abandoned platform on his mule cart, he felt something off. Not noise exactly, more like the absence of it. Even the crows had gone quiet. At first he thought it was just burlap sacks tossed by someone drunk and mean, but then he saw one of them shift. A small motion, like a flinch. He climbed down slow boots, cracking frost, and stepped closer. There were 3 figures, a woman rail-thin, dress torn and frozen at the hem. Her wrists were bound in front of her. She was trying to cradle 2 girls with her tied arms. The older girl, maybe 10, had bruises blooming like dark grapes under her jaw. The younger one, no more than 4, lay quiet but breathing. The mother looked up when she heard Elias's boots. Her lips were split, her left eye swollen shut. She didn't cry. She didn't beg. She only said in a voice that cracked but did not shake, "They left us here last night. Thought we'd freeze." Elias Boone didn't speak. He took out his knife, cut the ropes first, then shrugged off his coat and draped it around the woman's shoulders. The older girl tried to crawl away, flinching at his shadow, but he knelt and let her see his hands, rough, calloused, but steady. "Can you walk?" he asked. The woman shook her head, so he lifted her slow, careful, like she was made of glass. The older girl followed, dragging the little one by the hand. No questions, no judgment, just boots crunching frost as he carried them toward a place that hadn't seen light in a long time. And in the distance, the depot stood quiet again, like it was waiting to forget. The cabin stood at the edge of Cedar Creek, where the hills fell into each other like folded blankets. A place where snow settled early and left late. There were no neighbors nearby, and the nearest town was a half-day's ride if you had a good horse. Elias Boone didn't. He had a mule named Ivy with a limp in one leg and a temper that suited the man who fed her. By the time they reached the cabin, the smallest girl was already asleep, her cheek tucked into the crook of her sister's arm. The mother, still silent, leaned against Elias's chest, eyes half shut from blood loss and cold. He opened the cabin door with his shoulder. Inside it smelled like pine smoke and winter onions. A single cot, a pot-bellied stove, and a rocking chair that hadn't rocked in years. He set them down gently, the woman on the cot, the girls on the rug by the fire. She stirred once when the heat reached her face, whispering something that sounded like a name. Elias didn't ask her to repeat it. He didn't ask anything. He stoked the fire, fetched water-cut bread, and made stew the way his wife used to. By habit, by memory. Not out of charity, but because that's what you do when someone's too cold to speak. That night the wind picked up, thudding against the shutters like fists. The youngest girl whimpered in her sleep. Elias moved closer to the fire and lay another log on without looking back. The woman, still unnamed to him, opened her eyes once before slipping into sleep. Just long enough to see the man who hadn't asked who she was or why. Just long enough to feel a room without threat. A quiet room. And for the first time in a long time, She didn't dream of running. When Maribel awoke, the light was already soft on the wood floor, bending in through the cracked shutters like fingers easing into the dark. The cot creaked beneath her as she sat up, her body reminding her of what had happened. The bruises, the bindings, the silence. But there was warmth in the room now, and the sound of something bubbling on the stove. She turned her head slowly. Her daughters were curled on a patchwork quilt near the fire, their hair tangled but cheeks pink. No rope, no fear in their sleep. Just breath, slow and steady. Across the room, Elias Boone stood at the stove, stirring something thick and brown in an old iron pot. He didn't speak. He didn't look at her. Just kept stirring. Maribel tried to rise. Pain pulled her back. "You don't have to move," he said quietly. "It's just stew." His voice wasn't unkind, just unused. She watched him for a long moment, unsure. A man who didn't question, didn't demand names, didn't ask what a woman with two daughters was doing, bound at a station in the cold. Maribel had met men who took silence as weakness, others who filled it with violence. But this one, he left space in it. Later that day, she tried to help, offered to sweep, to mend, to clean. Elias shook his head once. "You heal first," he said. At dusk, her eldest, Sophie, asked him, "Are we staying just one night?" Elias didn't answer right away. He looked at the door, then at the girl. "Long as you need." That night, Maribel stood at the door while the others slept, watching the stars blink into being. And for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like someone waiting to be sent away. She felt like someone waiting to decide. It was the sound of Sophie laughing that startled Elias Boone most. He was out near the paddock, hammering down a loose rail, when her giggle rose into the air like a lark breaking free. Not loud, not wild, just light and unexpected. He stood still for a moment, letting the sound settle in his chest, then went back to his work. Back in the house, Maribel was braiding Sophie's hair, her fingers more steady now. The bruises on her arms had faded to a dull yellow. The baby Lena was trying to drag a boot twice her size across the floor. There was no need to speak of the past, though some nights the wind pushed hard enough against the shutters to shake the silence loose. Elias never asked. But when Maribel's voice caught mid-sentence, or when she paused too long, staring at the edge of the tree line, he would quietly place a blanket near her chair, or leave a pot warming on the stove. Small things. One morning, Maribel found a line of carved wood animals on the windowsill. Tiny horses, a bear, even a fox with a crooked tail. "Did you make these?" she asked Elias that evening. He shrugged. "Years ago. They were gathering dust." Sophie piped up, "They're watching over us now." Maribel didn't say it, but something about that felt true. That week, she began walking again, out to the coop, to the creek. Her steps were careful but not afraid. One evening, she asked Elias if she could cook. He looked surprised but nodded. And when they sat down at the table, the four of them, and passed a worn tin bowl around like it was silver, there was no mention of what had been, only what might now be. Elias reached for the bread, his hand brushing Maribel's. He didn't pull away. The first frost came early that year. Elias Boone laid a second quilt on the girl's bed without saying a word. He left the lantern lit a little longer in the hallway. These weren't grand gestures, just the sort of quiet care that grows when people start expecting each other to stay. Maribel had begun keeping a small journal. Not of the past, she didn't want to remember too much of that. Just small details from the day: Sophie feeding the chickens, Elias handing her a pair of gloves without asking if she was cold, Lena falling asleep with a wooden fox in her hand. Each entry was just a line or two, but it helped her see the shape of something forming. Not quite family, not yet, but not strangers anymore. One evening, Elias showed her the back barn, the one with the loft that hadn't been used in years. "I was thinking," he said, almost gruff, "maybe the girls could have it come spring. Paint it up, make it their own." Maribel looked at him, surprised. "You mean to stay?" He didn't answer with words, just handed her a ring of old brass keys. "You pick which door they like." That night, Maribel stepped outside after everyone had gone to bed. The stars were pale and trembling in the cold. She remembered a time she prayed for escape, then a time she prayed for safety. Now, maybe she was learning to pray for something else, to grow roots, to stay put, and maybe, just maybe, to be loved without being owed. It happened on a Thursday, quiet as any other. Sophie was braiding Lena's hair by the hearth, while Maribel kneaded dough by the window. Elias had gone to check the west fence, or so he said. But something in the way he'd hesitated at the door just long enough to meet Maribel's eyes told her he was wrestling with more than wire and posts. He didn't return until sundown. When he did, there was a trembling in his hands. "Sheriff came by," he said, setting his hat down slowly. "Said a man came looking. Claimed he had legal right to take the girls." Maribel went still, her fingers dusted in flour clenched into fists. "Did you tell him I told him this is my land? And anyone who tries to cross it without honor won't like what they find." The fire snapped. Later that night, Elias sat with the girls while Maribel stood just outside the room. She heard him reading from an old storybook, his voice uneven but steady. Then, without prompting, Sophie asked, "Can we stay forever, Mr. Boone?" There was a long pause, then his voice soft as wool. "You can stay as long as the stars stay out." Maribel turned away before the tears could fall. She stepped outside and saw the fences still holding the house, still standing, the sky vast and open. And something inside her, something that had been braced for flight, exhaled. For the first time in years, she believed the past couldn't reach her here. Spring came like a slow thaw. The land softened, first snow, giving way to shoots of prairie grass, creek beds swelling just enough to remind the earth of its pulse. Then the house followed. Laughter found its way between the boards. Warm bread, braided ribbons on Sundays. And silence when it came was no longer hollow, just peaceful. Elias Boone started carving again. He'd not touched his tools in years, not since his wife passed. But one morning Lena brought him a broken chair leg, and without thinking, he mended it. That night, Sophie brought him a doll with a missing arm. "Could you fix her too?" she whispered. He did. By month's end, a little wooden horse sat on each girl's shelf, and a small carved bird waited on the windowsill of Maribel's room. She said nothing when she found it, just traced the wings with her finger and left her door open that night. One evening after supper, the girls surprised him. They had stitched a banner from scraps and placed it above the hearth, "Our home." That night, as he stood outside under the stars, Maribel came to stand beside him. "You never asked me to stay," she said. Elias looked at her. "You never asked to leave." She reached for his hand. They didn't speak of marriage or promises or past hurts. They didn't need to. They'd all been chosen in one way or another, and they'd all chosen to stay. That was enough. Sometimes what heals a home isn't answers. It's presence. A fire lit before dusk, a porch swept clean before morning, a hand that doesn't reach to fix but to hold. Elias never asked Naomi to explain how she ended up broken and silent in that train station. And she never asked what he lost so long ago that made his house so quiet. But between them, in the hush of shared chores and gentle glances, something steady began. The girls, Clara and June, started to hum while picking beans. Naomi smiled at the sound of a hammer, not in fear but comfort. And Elias, he started leaving the front door open again. Not every ending needs a grand gesture. Sometimes it's just a kitchen with 4 bowls instead of 1. And maybe that's what we all long for, not rescue, but someone who stays. If this story touched you in any way, if it reminded you that kindness can be quiet and love can begin long after hope is supposed to die, we invite you to subscribe to None, Wild West Saga. Leave a comment below. Would you like to see what happens next in Elias and Naomi's life, or hear more stories like theirs? Your words keep this fire going. And who knows, the next story might just be the one your heart's been waiting for.